If you're new here, my name is RuthAnn. My husband Lance was a service-connected, disabled U.S. Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and for the last 12 years of his life, I was his full-time caregiver. This podcast is about caregiving in all its forms. My friend Shawn is here for our third episode in this series where he talks about advocating for his neighbor, Robert. He did share in a previous episode that Robert is no longer living in his home alone, but Shawn is still advocating for him. So today he's going to share some more crazy stories, and we're also going to talk about protecting someone with dementia. Thanks so much for being here, Shawn.
Glad to be back, and I hope some of my stories will help others.
You shared a lot of stories in our previous two episodes, but can you share a couple more that show some of the dangers of Robert living alone with dementia?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Um, One of the things that was really scary with Robert living alone was he didn't know what time of day it was, and he would fall asleep during the day, which was uncharacteristic of him because he was so exhausted, but then wake up at night and go out and wonder why it's dark. One of the concerns I had is he lived in such a rural area that he was a routine exercise personality. He always worked out, he always went for walks, and it was just ingrained in him. But when he started taking those walks, they were at random times. And I was really concerned because he lived in the woods and he would get confused. One of the things that happened, this is just one of many things, but he, even when he was starting to show signs of problems, he was over down the road clearing some brush with a chainsaw, and he fell back into a bush with the chainsaw, and it was still running and it was laying there, and it took him quite a long time to get untangled from this bush. And then he called me and I went and helped him find the chainsaw because he couldn't remember what bush he was stuck in. And so I found that. And then another time he was over there and he said, he was in the woods and he said he had to go to the bathroom. This is what I found out later, but he called me from a neighbor's phone, one of my known neighbors. I answered the phone. I thought it was the neighbor, and it was not. It was Robert, and he was frantic, and he said he can't find the vehicle. And so I went over there, and this neighbor was our county constable, and he had known Robert, and he really thought this was odd because he was, this constable on his spare time was working on the road with his tractor, and he saw Robert on the other side of a fence waving him down frantically, and Robert could not figure out where he was. And so he called me. I went over there, and Robert said that he had gone to, tried to go to the bathroom in the woods, and he walked a little bit away from the vehicle and then couldn't figure out where it was, and he ended up getting really lost. And then, there were incidences like that, but one of the worst ones was when I went over to check on him. I saw him about a quarter mile away from his house walking down the road, and he was struggling to walk. His balance was way off. And so I stopped to find out what's going on, and he fell right on his face. He, for some reason, started focusing on what I was saying, and he started going into like a forward leaning run just to try to keep his balance, and he just slammed his face right on the ground and got a black eye. And so there was wandering issues. one of the other things that was really dangerous was, in the United States, a lot of households have weapons. They have guns and things like that, even knives. They're everywhere. And so uh, one day I went over there, and he had his little 22 rifle, and he was trying to shoot a squirrel in front of his 500-gallon propane tank. And I knew that this is really terrible. And so I got him to stop trying to do that, because he said the squirrel was tormenting him. And so I basically, I know this is not funny, but I'm in shock that I even had to go through this, but basically when I talked to his son and I explained a lot of these dangers, his son had sent that certified letter over, like I mentioned. It mentions taken away. He wants me to take away his car keys. He wants me to take away other safety issues or disable safe things that are dangerous to him. And so what I did was I became very concerned that one day I'm going to go check on him and he's going to mistake me for something, even the squirrel, and shoot me. And so I I have a bunch of gun locks, just happen to have them. And I took them over there, and one day he's sitting in his recliner and he's focused on the show and he's kind of out of it a little bit. And I went around and I took these gun locks, because I know weapons very well, being a military veteran and living where we do. I know weapons very well. I was able to clear them, lock them, and basically kind of make that situation safer. But he didn't like that, so there was a problem. He had other weapons, and I had to kind of keep one weapon available to him. Otherwise, he would call the sheriff or something like that. He'd call 911. And so I left his 22 rifle, but I completely removed all the ammunition for it. And I cleared the house of it. I was positive. And then 2 days later, I came back and he had his 22 rifle and he was trying to pound a bullet into the magazine that didn't fit that particular weapon. And he was hitting it with a screwdriver, not a screwdriver, but a pair of pliers. And I have that bullet over there on my shelf. It looks like a banana, and how that thing didn't go off is beyond me. So then I went through his house top to bottom while he was taking a nap and found a bunch of boxes back in the corner of his closet. And so I was able to remove all ammunition from his house. And this was per request by his son. And then other problems were with, he had a habit. I mean, this is stuff that normal people aren't going to have to deal with, trust me. But being in a rural area, a lot of people out here, not myself, but a lot of people out here have these burn barrels, and they'll burn their papers and stuff like that, and then haul their regular trash to the dump. Robert used to still light fires in his burn barrels, and that was really terrible. And so it got to the point where there were so many safety issues that I knew something could possibly happen. I thought it was probable. So I would say that, yeah, it was very widespread, the safety issues.
Wow, that just listening to what you had to go through, my husband had dementia. And so I had to take some safety precautions with him as well. But this was your neighbor. This is what strikes me every story that I hear of yours, is that this was just your neighbor, and all the time that you gave up to make sure that he was safe is thank you so much for doing what you did. But I also don't know how you did it. It's a lot. Um, you mentioned in our last episode that you checked on Robert once a day. Did you ever check on him more than once a day? And how much time did you spend over there with him? I would imagine it depended on like what was going on with him, but also how did you balance his need for independence with making sure that he was safe?
Well, I'd have to answer that with this was really, really hard on myself and my family because instead of working like I should have been doing, um, I was checking on him and having to address all kinds of issues over there. And one would say, well, why did you just not get back to work and why would you do that? So my particular value system that's ingrained in me says I can either check on him and at least make an effort to not let him die or work. And I was positive he's just going to die. And in our state, there's not a lot of safety measures for this situation. Um, in other states, they can come and take a person away like this. But in the case of Robert, he actually was really good at fooling anybody who would check on him. I mean, he could come right back to life and be coherent uh, on cue. It was almost like bad luck for me because I would see all these things happening and I'd tell people and then they wouldn't see it. A lot of the neighbors did, but if EMS showed up, they ask him questions, he can answer them all, then legally they can't do anything. And if they can't detect it, then neither can anyone in the state. So I checked on Robert once a day. Um, there was, I couldn't live over there with him. I had my own family and none of the other neighbors were willing to check on him or anything. A lot of neighbors really thought I shouldn't even get involved with him. And the problem is I was kind of stuck because I ended up being the last person on earth that could keep him from dying. And so I was in a real bad predicament. But what ended up happening is some of our roads became so impassable during winter when he was over there that I couldn't even take my regular vehicle over there. I had to take an all-wheel drive ATV and just try to trudge through the snow and everything to get to his house. And when you're doing that on an ATV in the snow, a 3-mile trip can take 45 minutes easily to get there because it was so bad and the conditions were so bad. Robert was never agreeable to do anything other than what he was doing. I could never, ever get him to go somewhere else. He would never agree with anything. He was a very stubborn person. And so I would go over there and he had his routine. One of the things I didn't realize till later was he had lists of things everywhere throughout the house. And I thought it was because he was trying to be organized, but I didn't realize it was his crutch for remembering things because he was forgetting things so badly. So I'd go over there and I'd get his list for grocery stores, and he'd even have lists of things that went wrong so that I could fix them. If there was he ripped the door handle off the door accidentally or something like that, I would fix it. And so this ended up from I would say until May 6th. Uh, it was about 7 months of this where I was checking on him every day, and it was really time consuming and it really hurt my income real bad. It hurt our family's financial situation really badly. And to this day, we haven't fully recovered from that. But I just looking back, I don't know if I would have done anything different. I'm not sure because, everybody has this ideal world where you say, well, you just call the authorities, they'll take care of it, they'll put them in a home, or adult protective services will come. No, not here, not here. As others in the system have pointed out, there are lots of people with dementia that are walking the streets out in the big towns in our state. They all fall through the cracks unless something major has happened. So Robert is actually just one of hundreds or thousands that are in this situation. And so my choice was either let this man die horribly or not. And his son hadn't seen him in over 20 years, and he's on the other side of the country. But I still tried to get his son to be the one calling the shots as much as possible. But his son, to this day, I've tried to see if his son can come over here and maybe see his dad, and his son hasn't wanted to do that. Part of it is because he doesn't want to see his dad in this situation. And I've offered to take Robert over to his son. I would drive him over there or whatever need be so that he can have his dad, but he doesn't want that. And he sent that to me in writing several times. So I'm in kind of a weird situation. So generally, when I went over there, I had my routine. I would first show up and assess the situation. I had a key to his back door, and I would go and see if something's amiss first, then focus right on him. And then, sometimes there'd be a new hole in the wall because he fell and he kind of broke through it or something. Sometimes there would be something, clogged up like a sink or something like that, or a broken dish or something on the floor because he fell. And then I would ask him how he's doing, and then he immediately, instead of answering how he's doing, he would tell me the very first thought on the top of his mind, which could be some random thing, especially off of like some TV show he was watching. And he had a hard time differentiating between fictional TV and reality sometimes, and then other times he's just fine. So I'd do that, visit with him, sit with him, and then I would straighten out any problems, and then I would make sure that he's kind of in a comfortable nestled state, where he's like he's good. And then I would take his list for the week, and my wife and I, when we go get our groceries, you would get his groceries. And then once I got his groceries, that required an immediate visit to him again. I'd go over there with his groceries and get them in the freezer and all that, and then check on him. And it just was this kind of a routine from hell. I mean, to be honest with you, it was almost from hell. And I was just hoping that someday it would end, because he was very resistant to any change whatsoever. You could not talk him into anything. So I knew at some point something was going to have to give, and it finally did.
You mentioned the notes that he had all over the place, and you've talked about the holes in the walls and the coffee table flipped upside down. There were lots of little signs, but when did you realize that he was downplaying his symptoms, and how did you handle it?
Well, looking back, I didn't realize how far back he was downplaying his symptoms, because it actually went back even further than when I was checking on him at home. Even previous to that, he was having balance issues. There was something off where he would fall backwards to the side, and he'd constantly trying to catch himself. He would show up at my house, he'd get out of his car, he'd be talking to me, and then he would just start losing his balance, fall back, and the next thing you know, he's still talking to me, but he's like, instead of next to me, he's 5 feet away, all because he caught his balance and he just continued his conversation. So he compensated that way. And then when I would go to his house and there were issues, he always downplayed them, like, oh, I just fell, I'm fine. And he was having more and more bathroom related incidences, real problems. And he would blame that on, oh, I just have loose stool or something like that. And there was a constant, everything was explained away in his mind, and there was no arguing with him. I found that early on I can try to reason with him and argue with him or whatever I need to do, and it made it worse. It absolutely made everything worse to try to second guess him. And what I found out later is all this stuff where he was overcompensating and explaining everything away. I found out that that wasn't him necessarily making a conscious decision to do that. It was actually kind of part of the disease. It's a survival instinct that was kicking in, and I just didn't know it at the time.
Well, I've talked before about these being a wake up call, and I think that all of these are great examples of things that we should pay attention to, especially with our aging population, our parents, and neighbors and other family members. So everything came to a head on May 6th. And you did tell that story, and that was a very emotional thing for you because I know that it was so traumatic, all the things that led up to that date. But then you have still continued to advocate for him. How many places have you helped him move to? And what were some of the problems that you faced, some of the less than desirable conditions that he faced in some of these places?
Well, as we ended the episode last time on May 6th, Robert was finally flown out by helicopter from his home. And I went home, and I think I almost slept for 2 days. It just felt like I had so much relief. He's in a place where somebody is looking out for him other than me. I felt like a massive emotional, I can't even explain it. It's almost like you're being pressed down so hard that one day it's just released. And so for a very short period of time, I didn't have to worry about him. But then that was about to change because the hospital, because Robert wasn't super coherent, they did contact his son. They found him somehow. I didn't provide that, but they called him and made him temporary power of attorney because his father was not uh, with it, could not make his own decisions. So his son called me because instead of making all these decisions, he wanted me to be involved because I was involved. So it was really strange, but the hospital was ready to turn him loose. In other words, they called his son mainly to say, we're about to release your dad. We need you to come get him. And his son said, I can't. I'm over on the other side of the country, but Shawn can come get him. So that's what his son did to me. And so I get this call, and hospital wanted to release Robert. And I said to the hospital, I said, you can't release him. And they said, well, he was just dehydrated. And I said, no, he can't walk. There's something really, really wrong here. And I said, I'm not going to come get him until you guys find out this. And they said, well, let's check. We'll call you back. Well, it turns out that Robert was laying in a hospital bed the entire time, and they literally did not determine he couldn't even walk. Like this event that happened back at his house that caused him to get flown out, left him with serious debilitations, and the hospital did not know it. So then they called me back and said, okay, he can't walk. There is something wrong. We're going to send him in for a series of tests. And they mostly told his son this stuff because they couldn't tell me all of this stuff because of HIPAA. And so uh, I heard most everything through his son until one day. But anyway, what happened was there was a social worker at this hospital that gave us a call back, and they had run some tests and found out that they think he has either Parkinson's or Alzheimer's because it showed up in the brain scans. And so I said, okay, now at least you guys are recognizing something. Well, then all of a sudden the social worker says, he can't live alone. He can't live at home anymore. He'll never be able to go back. So um, the social worker said we need to choose a place that he can go. But in the meanwhile, the hospital was transferring over to one of their partnering assisted living facilities near the hospital. So he got transferred over there for a little bit, and his insurance paid for most of that to a certain point. I think he got to be there maybe 30 days or 45 days or something like that. And then the insurance wouldn't pay for it anymore because it was part of the emergency care, and there's a limit on that. And then after that, insurance does not pick up the costs of assisted living for almost anybody in the nation. And so we ended up being forced to try to find a place really quickly. So I had his son check around. And the problem is in our area, there's nothing that's really that good or accommodating. So his son found a facility down in Phoenix. So that seemed like it was okay. The brochures were beautiful and everything seemed really beautiful. It was a very, very expensive looking place. So I arranged transport for Robert from the assisted living place up here down to this new place. And at that time, he still couldn't walk. He's in a wheelchair. And so he got down there, and it was a full service assisted living place. I thought, well, it turns out that it was beautiful. They had really great amenities, but the staff had some issues. Some of them, not all of them, but I'm just saying some. And as Robert would call me, sometimes once every hour. So here I am, finally going back to work, and I'm getting phone calls from Robert constantly. They let his hair grow out. He was so upset about that because he was always a clean shaven, clean cut man. And when I saw him, he actually looked really unkept, and his hair was long, he had stubble. And the absolute worst part about it was he kept telling me and his son on the phone that there's a nurse or orderly guy who is hurting him. And I didn't even know what to make of that, because the problem you have is if your loved one has dementia, these things could be true or they could be not true. I mean, there is almost no way to tell by just simply hearing their complaint. You have to kind of follow up and see, is this happening? And at the time he couldn't walk, so they instead of helping him to the bathroom, they found it was easier to put him in diapers. So when he was in diapers laying in his bed, he would be laying there for hours and hours, and he'd have gone to the bathroom and they wouldn't come when he pushes the button, and he would start getting rashes and things like that. And there was a night orderly that was there that would come in when he needed to be changed, and he said the guy was really, really rough with him and hurt him multiple times. So then I finally, I talked with his son, and his son was really angry, but not here once again. So here I am doing everything. So I constructed a really threatening, powerful letter with the help of some kind of legal mindset, I guess I'll just say that much, and sent it to the owner of these 3 facilities that are down there. And the owner of all of them came back. She's not really owner, but she was like the top manager of the whole thing. She called me immediately, and it had a lawyer on the phone with her, and they let me know that, and they want to know more about this. And so I told them what was going on, and she just said, I'm going to call you back. And so she went and talked with Robert to try to get a firsthand account of what's going on. And Robert at that time was scared, but he told her, and she came back and said that this surprised me so much, because normally they circle the wagons, but she said, yeah, this is the second time someone has complained about that orderly. So she went down to ask who it was, describe him. And he described him, and even what shift he was on. And she went, okay. She came back and she said, okay, another resident, a female there, had the same exact complaint. And so they terminated this person right away. And I said that we need to get him out of there right away, because they wanted to make it up to us. And I said, no, he needs to go. He is traumatized there. And so they gave us a refund on the rest of that month, because they had all this cancel early stuff in the contract, but they just freed all that up. So we were really scrambling to try to figure out, now, where are we going to put him? And so we checked around everywhere, and this is his son and I checked around all over the place, and a lot of places were full. I mean, they were just full, and they had waiting lists here. And so I was calling, and one of the things that was offered to us was these things called group homes, which are not facilities. They're more like a house around here, like a big old house with a bunch of rooms. And they have maybe 4 or 5 or 6 residents in this group home, and it operates more like a house. So I thought, well, that might be better for him instead of a facility, because then there'll be less unknowns about it. So we checked every group home, and they were all full, and I was even putting us on waiting lists and things like that. But one group home was just getting set up, and I talked to the owner of that, and she said, yeah, we'll take him. And she had experience in this before, because she worked in these group homes, and so now she decided to create her own. And so she said, yeah, let's do it. Let's do this right away. And here's how much it's going to cost. And it ended up costing exactly the same as this big facility that was really nice, but her home was fairly decent, and it was in the pine trees, and Robert loves the forest and everything. He didn't like the desert. So she and we went down to Phoenix to retrieve Robert, and we brought him back up. And he was at this home for a while. And his ability to walk came back. He was able to walk. He started with a walker, then pretty soon he's walking around. Then pretty soon he's helping with chores. He's sweeping, he's doing all this other stuff. But there was some underlying issues in this group home that was starting to be a problem. At first, it was pure. It was Robert and maybe 2 other people, and they had such a nice family atmosphere. He had his own room. They had a living room area where they could get together, congregate. Meals were always made. They could go to do things around the town together, and that was good. But then when the group home owner, she had these daughter and grandchildren that were having major problems. Like all of a sudden, there was a need for the daughter because her husband was just sent back to prison. The daughter moved into this group home with Robert and them, and then the next thing that happened was her children. She got temporary custody of her children back, who were very loud and very obnoxious, like crazy loud. And Robert was really sensitive to noise and chaos. And so the owner of this group home, she made this decision. Well, it's my kids, it's my grandkids, it's my baby. So she introduced that into the situation, and it just made everything really become terrible. And kind of like Robert was in hell. And so when she took Robert to his appointments, like she should have, to the neurologist, they were really, really kind of keeping track of the progression of Robert's Alzheimer's. He was full on diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He had early, mid stage. And they were tracking the brain scans, and then they did the full Alzheimer's test, whatever that is. I think it was like 4 or 6 hours long or something. I couldn't remember, but anyway, I got the results to that. But the doctor, they had prescribed him medications to kind of curb the Alzheimer's and the Alzheimer's effects, and then maybe some of the other issues he was dealing with physically. And Robert was not taking his pills apparently, because at some point she called me and she was really angry, and she said, "Guess what I found? I found all of his pills in his eyeglass case." And so then I asked Robert about that, and Robert said he learned that from being a prison guard, where the prisoners could mouth their medications, and then when no one's looking, just spit it out into something. So I have a picture of his eyeglass case just filled with pills. And so his medications weren't even being taken whatsoever, even though they thought he was. And they were upping doses even because they thought, well, maybe it's not working well enough. So this got to be like a really bad oversight. So being that Robert didn't want to take his medications and the house was getting loud and obnoxious, he was really, really struggling. And we didn't know where else to put him. We had no clue where he could go because most every place was full. So I talked with his son, and I said, you know what, this is getting really bad. And his son agreed. We gotta maybe change it up, and before it gets really, really bad. And so we had already started talking about getting him into maybe a large facility again. Or the other choice was maybe he's in hell so much because he's put in this unfamiliar situation where he doesn't even have his own routine and his own world going on. And so we looked at one third option we hadn't thought of before, and that is, what if he lived on his own, but we had caregivers come to his own place? And I'm not talking about out here in the woods, because they won't come out here. I'm talking about if he had his own place and we had caregivers coming over and managing him and helping him and things like that. So his son weighed the options and thought, you know what? He knows his dad is going to be in pure hell in a facility. He is a very non-compliant person. He doesn't go along with anything. He's not docile. So his son really felt like it's either a choice of his dad living in hell or his dad, we take a little bit of a risk with him, but maybe, and mentally he's not in hell anymore. So his son said, you know what? Let's try the other option. And so we started the process of finding him an apartment and make sure the apartment's really, really good. And then make sure the caregiver service that comes is really, really good. And we were able to uh, find that. I found an apartment that was not too far from my brother's house. It allowed me to go stay with my brother and their family and all my nieces and nephews and just be right close to Robert, very close. And it was the ideal situation. And so we started the process of doing that. But back at the group home, things turned from hell to worse. Robert has this problem to this day because of his Alzheimer's. He can't multitask. And when he heads somewhere, he says, I got to go, in his mind, he's like, I'm going to the refrigerator. He doesn't see anything on the way. He just goes to the refrigerator. And to this day, if I go to the store with him and he knows we have to go to this one place, he bumps into people almost violently and he doesn't know it. And they don't know what's going on. They're taken back, but he didn't even know he did that. Well, back at this group home, there were 5, what do you call them, residents, patients that lived there. And one of them, 2 of them were a couple. They were in their 80s. And Robert was going down the narrow hall of this home and did not see the lady. He was just going to the refrigerator. He's not a mean man. To this day, he's never been mean. But he just went by her and knocked her down. Didn't knock her down like violently, but she just ended up down. And the group home owner, she at this point was so sick of Robert that she did something that was really controversial, extremely. She called the sheriff, and the sheriff came, and she did not tell the sheriff that he had Alzheimer's. The sheriff took this man to jail in handcuffs, and Robert had been a prison guard for 27 years and had always had a pair of handcuffs on his belt and had never in his life been in handcuffs. So Robert was in, not necessarily behind bars, but he was at the jail. I got a phone call from his son because they tracked his son down, and his son told them to call me. So I get this phone call from the sheriff, and I said, I don't even know where to begin with this, because what the heck, what's wrong with this world? But they said that he's been arrested for assault and that, I don't know, they just asked me some questions, and I said, do you realize this man has Alzheimer's? They said, no, we don't. I said, here's his doctor's name. He's right. From the jail, the neurologist was literally less than a mile away from the jail. I gave him the doctor's name. I gave him everything. I said, this man has Alzheimer's. So then he said, well, let me call you back. So called me back and said that, okay, they checked with the in processing in the jail, and the jailer, whoever they are, won't take him because he has Alzheimer's. They don't have the capacity to handle that. So they said they're going to release him to me. So I dropped everything. I got in my truck. I went over to the group home first, which is really, really a scramble. I went over there and I said, I need all of his belongings. And so they helped me load everything of Robert's from the group home into my pickup truck because I am not bringing Robert back to this place. Then I went over to the jail, and Robert was just in there leaning down with his hands on his face and was not speaking to anybody. He never said a word to anybody in the sheriff's department or the jail. And I came and I put my arm around him. And he looked up and he goes, Shawn. I mean, that's the situation I'm in. I'm in that situation where I'm the only one that can rescue him, apparently, to him. And so I got him out of the jail. And he did have a court. He had a citation for assault that wasn't going away. We had to deal with that later. But I was able to take him. And so luckily we had just gotten this apartment. You know, if we had just been able to move him a little sooner, this may not have even happened. But I just took him straight down because my wife and I had already started furnishing the apartment, and took him down, and he was traumatized the whole way down. I mean, I don't even know how to deal with this, you know? How do you put a person in a situation they don't fit in? And for some of the people that say, well, why didn't you just call the state or whatever? Do you understand that the state also can provide a certain amount of hell to your loved one? That's not the quick answer here. So got him down to the apartment. I stayed down there and just got him nestled in. And then the next day, he was so traumatized. He just kept talking about what had happened and all the things that had happened up in the house. And I couldn't believe some of the things he said. I mean, during the egg shortage, this group home owner decided to get chickens because she thought they could have chickens to make eggs because it would save her money in feeding the residents. And he told me the chickens were walking up and down the hallway in the house, and he was so sensitive to noise that the chicken would be pecking at his door, and he'd open the door and shoo the chicken away. So when I was down there, I'm hearing all this stuff that the group home owner, in checking in and all this stuff, you just don't hear about this stuff. You don't know this is going on. So now we got him into a much better situation because here he is. We got him an amazing apartment in a place that's fully gated, fenced in, secure, very clean. Their standards are very high. Their safety measures are very, very, very good. They spend money on fire safety and everything. You can tell right away. And so we got him in there, and the thing I did to really help Robert was I said, Robert, you're going to be here for a little while. He didn't want to be there either. But I just had, you kind of have to sort of lie to these people because they don't quite understand what's going on and they get traumatized. And so you just try to mitigate the situation up front. And so one of the ideas I got was, hey, Robert, this is your bed. And we chose your blankets and things like that. But there are some things missing here, and you're just going to be here a little while. Let's go around the house and just see the apartment and see what you're missing and things like that. And we made a list. He's like, I could use and he started focusing on kind of the things he'd need. And so we ended up going to the store and getting a paper towel holder that he wanted, and went to the grocery store and got the food he wanted finally. And it wasn't junk food. He actually chose really good food. And just tried to customize the situation and let Robert know you're kind of back in the decision making process now. And that seemed to really help him. And the other thing that really helped him was on the fireplace mantle, which the fireplace is kind of fake, but the mantle, before he even arrived, we had put pictures of his parents on the mantle. That was when he walked in the door, those were on the mantle. And he looks and he goes, his mom and dad are there, and he was happy. And so, there's things like that we had to do, but that was a tricky situation. And then the caregivers came and they worked out a plan. And of course, this was another risky thing because the caregiver service is not necessarily a 24-hour thing, but what we had to do is start seeing if Robert can handle being alone for certain periods of time. And the reason we knew he could is because at the other group home, he actually was alone at times where they weren't even keeping track of him. So I knew he could kind of handle himself. So we got into this kind of a routine where the caregivers will come and spend hours with him and assist with cleaning, take him to the store if he wants, visit with him. And at first he was a little resistant to the caregivers because he thought every one of them was kind of like the torture he had been through, because the caregiver service at first, the caregivers wore scrubs, just like nurses wear. And that's just the way they were. But after a while, they would rotate caregivers out and he would find one that he really liked. And so to this day, he is in this same situation, and it's been 2.5 years where he has been living alone in his apartment with caregivers coming routinely, Robert and I communicating routinely, Robert communicating with his son rarely, and others checking on Robert, as well as the apartment managers know that Robert has Alzheimer's, and they call me when there's anything wrong. So right now we have enough of a safety net in place that it's been working. I will not say it will work forever because something could go wrong any minute, but we're doing what we can, the best we can, because there's really not a lot of guidebooks on this kind of stuff. And I sure as heck am in a weird position because I'm not even related to Robert, but yet I'm the only one on earth that Robert believes can get him out of any bind or any jam and doesn't judge him.
You've shared a lot, but these stories are so important for people to realize what happens to people who have dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's so easy to say, just let them go. That's the easy way out. I can't tell you how many times I heard that while I was caring for my husband. I cared for him the last 12 years of his life because he had early onset dementia. And the things that I thought about were some of the stories that you talk about now. What would happen to him if I put him in a home? Because I did have him in an adult daycare for a while I was going to school. And those were not great conditions because he was only about 40 years old. So, what I would really like people to get out of this, out of your stories, is to really stop and think about what you're doing to your loved one who has dementia or Alzheimer's when you move them into these facilities. And I understand sometimes you just can't get away from it, but I know that there are times when people just don't want to deal with it. You don't want to see your loved one decline. And it is really, really hard. I know that from experience. But I can tell you, it's been 5 years since my husband passed away. And those 12 years were some of the hardest of my life. I would not trade it for a second. I am so grateful that I was able to keep him at home and keep him comfortable. And I'm really thankful that you are doing that for Robert, even though you have no ties to him other than he was your neighbor. It's a pretty incredible story. And I really appreciate you sharing it with us. We do have one more episode that we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of his personality changes. So that'll be in our next episode. Thanks so much for joining me, Shawn, and for sharing these really tough stories.
Well, it's my pleasure. And like I said, if this can even help one person out there, it was all worth it.